Álvaro de Mendaña de Neira was a Spanish navigator. Born in Congosto, in León, he was the nephew of Lope García de Castro, viceroy of Peru. He is best known for the two voyages of discovery he led into the Pacific in 1567 and 1595 in search of Terra Australis. Search for Terra Australis. Historian Brett Hilder has written of ardent spirits in Peru, inspiring 3 Spanish voyages to the southwest Pacific in the 40 years from 1565 to 1605. One of these ardent spirits was certainly Spanish. Soldier Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa, who arrived in Peru in 1557. Sarmiento de Gamboa developed an interest in Inca stories of golden riches being collected from lands further to the west. Sarmiento's proposal for an expedition to find land in the Pacific was put to Governor Lope García de Castro, finding favor as it matched common Spanish belief in the existence of a Great Southland. Historian Miriam Estenson argues Governor Castro also agreed as a way of maintaining peace and order. Restless and disruptive elements in the Spanish Americas were encouraged to join such journeys of exploration to remove them from colonial society. The lure of possible wealth made these expeditions attractive to such men, are often drawn from the poorest levels of society. However, Sarmiento de Gamboa was bitterly disappointed not to be made Captain General of the expedition. Instead, command was given to the Governor Castro's nephew, the younger and relatively inexperienced Álvaro de Mendaña de Neira. Sarmiento was to be a cosmographer. In Sarmiento's written account, he was captain of the flagship and at least on the same level as chief pilot and navigator Hernando Gallego. While Sarmiento's interest was the riches to be gained, Mendaña's priority was conversion of the heathen to Christianity. Deep divisions had been created within the Spanish command, even before the expedition departed. The two ships, the 200-ton Los Reyes and the 140-ton Todos Santos, sailed from Quildao, in Peru on the 20th of November 1567, with about 150 sailors, soldiers, priests and slaves on board. After sighting a small island in mid-January, a significant body of land was sighted on February 7, 1568. It was Santa Isabel Island, where they landed several days later. The expedition had discovered the Solomon Islands, which they named Islas Salomon. The Spanish immediately came into contact with Solomon Islanders, and at first the relationship was cordial. However, the Spanish expedition's need for fresh food and water quickly led to tension and conflict, the Solomon Islanders' subsistence economy being unable to provide continuous supplies to the Spanish. The real prizes were pigs, desperately needed by the Spanish, while vital to the local people's economy. The cultural gulf was wide. In one famous account, the Spanish were horrified to be offered a quarter of a boy with the almond hand, which the islanders urged Mendaña to eat. The islanders were offended when the Spanish refused. After building a small brigantine, the surrounding islands of Malaita, Guadalcanal, Madeira and Quasiel Island were explored. However, the attempt to barter for food led to the same cycle of friendly welcome, misunderstandings, sullen retreats, occasional reconciliations, robberies and violent retaliation. Finally, at a council meeting of captains, pilots, soldiers and sailors on August 7, 1568, the decision was made to return to Peru. Mendaña had wanted to sail further south, while Sarmiento de Gamboa and several soldiers unsuccessfully urged the establishment of a colony. The two ships sailed north then east, passing the Marshall Islands and Wake Island, before reaching the Mexican coast in late January 1569. It was a long and difficult voyage, with numerous deaths from scurvy. Results of the first voyage. The main result of the expedition was the discovery of the Solomon Islands and Tuvalu. The navigators also gained valuable sailing experience for Spain, especially in crossing the vast South Pacific from Peru. These discoveries led to successive expeditions in search for Terra Australis, both by Mendaña himself and by Pedro Fernández de Queiroz. However, the Great South Land had not yet been discovered by Europeans. The islands found, by now popularly called the Solomon Islands, had not revealed more than a few indications of gold. There were no spices and the people had not been converted to Christianity. The 1595 to 1596 voyage, a much larger and costlier expedition, had been planned by the early 1590s, after Mendaña had spent years courting favor in Madrid and Lima. 4 ships and 378 men, women and children were to establish a colony in the Solomon Islands. Again, the leaders of this voyage had widely divergent personalities. Mendaña was again in command, accompanied by his wife Doña Isabel Barreto, her 3 brothers and a sister. Chief pilot was to be a young Portuguese navigator in Spanish service, Pedro Fernández de Queiroz. An argumentative old soldier, Pedro Marino Manrique, was chosen as camp master. Manrique caused disputes before the fleet had even departed. The 4 ships, San Geronimo, the Santa Isabel, the smaller frigate Santa Catalina and the galleot San Felipe, left Callao on the 9th of April 1595. Spirits were high in the first month, 15 marriages being celebrated. Mendaña had Queiroz prepare charts for his captains that only showed Peru and the Solomon Islands. On the 21st of July 1595 the ships reached the Marquesas Islands, to be met by 400 people in canoes. Although the Spaniards admired their graceful shape and almost white complexion, the relationship with the natives later deteriorated. When the expedition left 2 weeks later, Queiroz estimated 200 Marquesans had been killed. Despite Mendaña's confidence that the Solomon Islands were nearby, it was not until the 8th of September that they sighted land again. This time the island of Nendo, which they named Santa Cruz. The Santa Isabel had disappeared, however, and despite searches by the 2 smaller vessels, it could not be found. Arriving at what is now Graciosa Bay, a settlement was commenced. Relations with local islanders and the chief Malope started well, with food provided and assistance in constructing buildings. However, morale amongst the Spanish was low and sickness was rife. Manrique was murdered at the orders of and in front of Mendaña, and shortly afterwards, Malope was killed by soldiers. Relations with the islanders soon worsened. Racked by internal divisions and an increasing death toll, the settlement began to fall apart. Mendaña himself died on the 18th of October 1595, leaving his wife as heir and governor, her brother Lorenzo as captain general. On the 30th of October, the decision was made to abandon the settlement. When the 3 ships departed on the 18th of November 1595, 47 people had died in the space of 1 month. Pedro Fernández de Queiroz is credited with bringing the San Geronimo safely into the Philippines without the aid of charts, arriving in Manila Bay on the 11th of February 1596. Over 50 people died on the 12-week voyage from Santa Cruz, in part due to the lack of food supplies and allegedly Doña Isabel's refusal to share out her private store of food and water. The frigate disappeared during the voyage, while the galleot San Felipe arrived in the southern end of Mindanao several days later. Aftermath of the 378 who sailed from Peru, about 100 survived, but 10 more died shortly after arriving in Manila. Doña Isabel Barreto was honored in Manila, and Queiroz was commended for his service and absolved of any responsibility for the killings on Santa Cruz. 3 months later, Doña Isabel married the governor's cousin. She continued to agitate for a return to the Solomon Islands. She died in 1612. Back in Peru in June 1597, Queiroz began his campaign to return to the Solomon Islands, leading the next Spanish venture in 1605. This expedition was also unsuccessful, but it led to the discovery of the Pitcairn Islands and Vanuatu, which were explored and briefly settled in the case of Espiritu Santo. Queiroz visited the Solomons in 1606, but was unable to establish a settlement. The Solomons were not again visited by outsiders until 1767, when Philip Carteret sighted Santa Cruz and Malaita Islands. The story of the voyages told in the Islands of Unwisdom, an historic novel by Robert Graves,